Um, Steve wants to take you back in time with a question, and we have a few.
Yeah, so can you tell us about your involvement on Patrick Moraz's Story of I? Well, we actually discussed it on the show over the summer. We've been going through like the first solo albums from each Yes member since joining Yes. So tell us about your involvement in Pat's album.
Well, it was due to Ray Gomez's kind of intervention. I had played with Carmine Appice. It was my very first gig when I left music school. And he had found Ray Gomez, who was and is a brilliant guitarist. And Ray is friends with Patrick Moraz. Ray, admired me, which I thought was very kind. And when Patrick was about to do a record, Ray said, "You got to use this guy Berlin." And Patrick did in my first record. And then I met Alphonse Mouzon on that record. And he and I went like this as a rhythm section. I still remember the bass line we played, the first one.
How interesting. And what year was that?
1975. I hadn't played that in whatever number of years 1975 forward is.
Yeah,
Could you hear the bass? It's about too soft.
That's neat. And then through Pat, you met Bill Bruford.
Could you hear the bass?
It was cutting in and out a little bit. We heard it before we went live, though.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Maybe because it was too loud, maybe a little too loud, and it's gating or something. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, but folks, go get the album. and Patrick introduced you to Bill. There you go. You met Bill through Pat, correct?
No, I met Bill. He came to America to play with Ray.
Oh.
And Ray invited me to play as the bass player, and Bill and I found each other at that rehearsal. And that's my first meeting with Bill Bruford.
And in the book, as Stephen put it, we were talking earlier, he said, let's ask Jeff and get his side of the story and see if they match up. Talk about like Bill talks about in his book, a dinner, meeting your family and kind of, I guess, I'm thinking I came across to me so that your folks would see that you're getting a real gig with a real guy and just had like, as he describes, a real welcoming family. But for you guys to kind of get a little closer and meet, is that how it went down?
No. He wanted a place to stay. I think I said you could stay over at my family home in Long Island, and he did. And that's fairly well the story. It wasn't anything deeper than that, and we would go out and rehearse, and that's really it.
Okay, because he did compliment the family on the dinner, and what an experience he thought that was.
Yeah, so what can you tell us about that period, like being part of the Bruford band?
It was one of the most exciting musical periods for me because I was a guy that came out of music, give me a second, having been shown that music functions a certain way. Bill didn't function that way. If he heard something, he did it. If he imagined a melody, whether it worked, according or against the rules, he wrote it. And that was a very eye-opening thing for me. Once he was playing the piano and he played some interesting odd harmony, and I said to him, that note doesn't work there. And he said, well, I like the way that sounds. And I can still see this in my mind. And that shocked, but in a positive way. Holy mackerel, music isn't about, in the artistic sense, the rule element of it. It certainly is, I'm learning of it, but not in the artistic sense. So being with him and playing with him and recording with him was one of the great universities of my musical life. And
it's like he tossed away all rigid structure that people relate music to as we learn as musicians, and he just disconfigured it and did what he thought was pleasing to him, which is amazing.
Well, that's, I think, is where style comes from.
Yeah.
And it's always the person that eventually doesn't follow tradition or follow, standards and sort of creates their own pathway. And being with him in that regard, I learned. I mean, I wasn't with him to learn, but I certainly did learn. He opened my eyes to many things.
Bill, there's no drum. There's a lot of drummers that sound similar in a lot of ways. There is no drummer that sounds anything like him. The drum sound, his playing. He's the first person and maybe the only that I ever heard say, and this was a big eye-opening thing for me as a young musician, that music is the space between the notes that you don't hear. And that, like, at first that's so profound, but you let that soak in and marinate, and it's like that's what creates the patterns and the it was just so neat to hear that reveal from him, especially as a drummer.
Yeah. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I was just gonna say, in Bill's autobiography, he was also, it was interesting. He was very complimentary, being like, basically saying, Jeff was the guy that he needed, like, for the band. And it is like a really neat thing. But that wasn't the only time you worked with him. As many Yes fans know, because there's some overlap in all these different things. In 1989, you also filled in for Tony Levin on the ABWH tour when Tony had hepatitis. So there were 4 shows that were canceled, but then you played with the band for 7 consecutive nights, from what I found on Forgotten Yesterdays. So the final week of that first North American leg of the tour.
I was there for one of them. I saw you and met you after the show in San Diego. I don't know if you remember the radio DJ in that town, Cheryl Red Shoes. And she introduced us and we chatted after the show, and you were great. It really was. It was neat. Steve, go ahead. I had to jump in and let Jeff know I saw one of those amazing performances in person.
Oh, no, yeah, you're good. How long did it take to get the hang of that set list? And how familiar were you with the Yes songs they played and the ABWH material at that point?
Well, it's an interesting story, and it sort of pertains to my past. I'm a transcriber. I've listened closely to music and would write out sax solos and, piano solos, and I have stacks of the stuff to help me to learn how to play in unique ways. Harking back to that thing you mentioned about Bill, that I was the right bass player. That was the sort of the fusion-y, happy 70s, Jocko and Stanley and Alfonso Johnson, and then I was in that mixture. Yeah. That was allowed. It was encouraged. So I was the right person at the right time. But with Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, Howe, I remember this. I got a call on a Sunday night, and they said, "Would you play with us?" And I said, "I'd be honored." So they sent me the song list, and I'm a good transcriber, so I hope this doesn't sound like too braggadocious, but I learned the show by Wednesday. And there were some songs like Close to the Edge, which I'd grown up with. Remember I said earlier that there were certain songs that I just would drink them in, the Jack songs. I didn't merely listen to music. I dove into it. It was just my particular pathology or DNA. So I knew Close to the Edge, but had to refresh some of the things. Everything else I wrote out, because I'm a quick study. Mm-hmm. And Sunday they called me. Wednesday I flew, and Thursday I was on stage.
Wow, that's awesome. It was great. It was really a great show. What a neat time. And when we listen to the musicians you've played with now on your own record, of course being influenced by Jack Bruce, playing with Pat Moraz, being in Bill's band, years later, like Steve said, with ABWH, you've also fooled around a little bit with, if I remember correctly, John McLaughlin and Alan Holdsworth.
Yeah,
how different were each of these compartments? Was it almost like opening new flowers on your vine each time you played with all these different musicians? Or was it kind of like, okay, this is my lane, this is their lane, they're all sort of in the same box? I mean, I have a feeling that's not what it was like.
You're right. It wasn't. It was like my, it's like my recognizing the leaders' perspectives and trying to accommodate them. My earlier rep was I would just play and play and, never listen. And I think that was a little, not true. I listened, and I was fortunate to be in bands where I could do my thing, but it wasn't always necessary in all cases. So when I played with McLaughlin, it was a trio of a unique, particular kind. And I wasn't into, this.
Yeah.
But almost a whole other aspect that would fit his particular vision, but still provide a little percolating. Alan, the same thing. I would do, we recorded a record as sort of inspired by Eddie Van Halen got Alan a little record deal on Warner Brothers, and Ted Templeton, we recorded this record, so on it. And I don't know, whatever band I happened to be in, I sort of hovered, above and underneath the music industry, to the left of it, to the right of it. And I love being a sideman, and I love being a leader. So in playing with the different people that I played, sort of allowed me to find my spot. I played in a trio with Dennis Chambers and Scott Henderson. And even there, Scott is such a dynamic guitarist, and Dennis is such an explosive drummer, that if I went wild, we'd just have a cacophony of noise. So I had to find my spot, and it was an interesting musical education each time that I played in any situation, because it wasn't about me. So in that regard, I tried to find a way to make it about us. And I'm really a good team player in that regard. In the most, I did something the other day, a studio gig for a guy, and it was, rhythm, bum, 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 boom,
Yeah.
And it's about the song, it's about the band. So everything I do is and had done had been about that. But when it came my time to solo, I would put my heart and soul into it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going back to drinking in music like Close to the Edge and Cream, do you have a favorite Yes album? Is it Close to the Edge, or is it a different one?
I don't really have a favorite, but I would say Fragile and Close to the Edge are probably the two. But Relay is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.